Mara Chen learned very quickly that some offices were built to impress and some were built to intimidate. Calder Ridge Consulting managed both. The lobby smelled faintly of stone polish and expensive coffee, the elevators moved like they had signed non-disclosure agreements, and the people on the 32nd floor had mastered the art of sounding calm while saying things that made junior analysts forget how to breathe. Mara had been at the company for 19 days, which was long enough to know where the printer jammed, which conference room had the broken thermostat, and which people said, "Circle back," when they meant, "Fix this before I lose patience." It was also long enough to learn that the coldest person in the building was Adrian Vale. He was the director everyone lowered their voices around. Tall, severe, impossibly composed, the kind of man who could stand still and still make a room feel rearranged. He wore dark suits, sharp watches, and an expression that suggested emotions were a private inconvenience. People called him efficient when he was in earshot and terrifying when he was not. He never lingered by anyone's desk, never joined birthday cake gatherings, never laughed loudly enough to be heard from outside a meeting room. If he had hobbies, no one knew them. If he had friends, none of them were visible before 6 in the evening. Mara should not have noticed him as much as she did. She had promised herself she was done noticing difficult men. 3 months before taking the job, she had ended an engagement without technically being the one to end it. Her former fiancé had sat across from her in their half-packed apartment and explained, in a voice so careful it felt rehearsed, that he loved her but could not imagine building a life with someone who treated tenderness like a language she had only studied in books. The sentence had followed her from Chicago to Manhattan, from her old apartment to her narrow new one in Brooklyn, from every box she unpacked to every morning she stood in front of the bathroom mirror trying to look like a woman who had chosen reinvention instead of surviving it. So she kept her head down. She hit deadlines. She smiled when appropriate. She avoided office gossip, or tried to. Then the flowers started arriving. The first Monday, she found a small bundle of white tulips tied with navy ribbon at the corner of her desk. No card. No florist tag. No message from reception. Just flowers arranged with startling care, fresh enough that tiny droplets still clung to the inner petals. Priya Nasser, who sat 2 desks away and treated mystery like a cardiovascular sport, gasped so dramatically that 2 people looked over the partition. "You have a secret admirer," she announced. "I have a delivery error," Mara corrected. "No one accidentally misplaces tulips this expensive." Mara laughed and set her bag down. "Maybe they were meant for legal. They seem litigious." Priya leaned in. "You're deflecting because you are scared of romance. I'm deflecting because it's 8:15 on a Monday." By lunch, the entire strategy pod knew about the bouquet. Jordan from IT claimed it had to be from someone in senior leadership because the building's front desk would have logged any outside delivery. Nina from finance said it was probably from a man trying to look thoughtful while avoiding accountability. Theo from facilities said, with great satisfaction, that all office love stories ended in either wedding registries or awkward elevator silences, with no middle category. Mara checked reception anyway. Nothing had been signed in. She checked security on the off chance someone had left it on the wrong floor. Nothing. She even asked housekeeping, feeling faintly ridiculous, but no one had seen who placed it there. By 5:30 the flowers were still hers, and because leaving them in the office felt sadder than carrying them home, she took them to her apartment and placed them in a glass pitcher because she did not own a proper vase. They made her kitchen look gentler than it had in weeks. The next Monday, there were roses. Not red. Cream and blush, arranged low and elegant, with sprigs of rosemary tucked between them. Priya nearly dropped her coffee. This is no longer a coincidence. This is a campaign. Mara looked around the floor with exaggerated suspicion. If a man thinks flowers are enough to make me ignore personality flaws, he has wildly overestimated the market. Maybe he has a good personality. Then he should put that in writing. Priya grinned. "I'm making a suspect list." "You absolutely are not." Priya opened a notes app too late. The list included a research associate who quoted poetry in Slack, a recently divorced manager in compliance who had started wearing cologne aggressively, and a quiet attorney on the 34th floor who brought homemade soup to the office whenever anyone was sick. Adrian Vale was not on the list. No one would have put him on a list involving flowers. The idea was almost absurd. He was the sort of man people imagined signing budget approvals with a blade of ice. And yet that same afternoon, Mara was leaving conference room B after a project kickoff when she nearly collided with him in the corridor. He stopped before she did, which felt impossible. His eyes flicked to the folder tucked under her arm, then to her face. "You're Chen," he said. Most people used first names by week 2. Adrian Vale used surnames like they were structural supports. "Yes. You're moving to the Fairmont account." It took Mara half a beat to process. "I'm sorry." The client expanded scope. "I need another strategist on the transition team. Patel recommended you." Patel was her department head. Also, apparently, a person who made career-altering decisions without warning her first. "I can take it," Mara said, because there were only 2 acceptable answers to Adrian Vale and one of them was silence. He studied her for a second longer than comfort allowed. "Good. We start tomorrow at 7. Then he walked away. Priya, who had witnessed the exchange from an astonishing distance, appeared beside Mara almost instantly. "I take back every terrible thing I said about fate. This is incredible. This is a staffing adjustment. This," Priya whispered, eyes bright with delight, "is proximity." Mara looked down the corridor where Adrian had disappeared, dark suit, straight shoulders, not a single unnecessary motion. "It is exhaustion," she said. But that night, when she watered the Monday roses before bed, she caught herself wondering whether a man who noticed workflow gaps might also notice flowers. By the end of Mara's first week on the Fairmont transition, she understood 2 things with painful clarity. The first was that Adrian Vale ran projects the way other people conducted military evacuations: no wasted words, no public panic, every detail tracked before it had the chance to become a crisis. The second was that the cold people feared in him was not cruelty. Cruelty enjoyed itself. Adrian never seemed to enjoy anything. He was simply built of discipline so dense it had hardened into a kind of weather. The team met each morning before sunrise in the glass conference room at the end of the hall. Mara arrived with coffee and color-coded notes. Adrian arrived already briefed, already composed, already on his second level of analysis. He asked sharp questions and expected precise answers, but he never humiliated anyone for not knowing something. If someone stumbled, he redirected. If numbers broke overnight, he had a backup model before most people had unlocked their laptops. That, Mara found, was almost more unsettling than outright meanness. Mean men were easy to categorize. Competent men with hidden restraint were dangerous. The third Monday brought pale blue hydrangeas. Priya stood over Mara's desk with the reverence of a museum curator. "This person has range." Mara stared at the bouquet, then at her inbox, then back at the bouquet. "If this is some kind of elaborate prank, I'd like to file a complaint with the universe." "It isn't a prank. It's romance. Or obsession. Possibly premium romance." Mara checked reception again. Nothing. She asked security whether cameras covered her row of desks. They did, but access required senior authorization, which was impossible to request without admitting she was trying to identify a floral stalker who had done nothing objectively threatening except understand her taste better each week. That afternoon, while she was adjusting a model in the conference room, Adrian appeared at her elbow and set down a revised operations spreadsheet. He did not comment on the hydrangeas. He did not glance toward them. He simply said, "Your retention assumptions were better than finances. Keep your version." It was, by Adrian's standards, nearly effusive praise. "Thank you," Mara said. He nodded once. "Don't thank me for being correct." She looked up before she could stop herself. That really sounded friendlier in your head, didn't it? For one suspended second, she thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. Possibly, he said. He left before she could recover. Mara sat very still, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Across the room, Theo from facilities walked past the glass wall, saw her expression, and very visibly doubled back in order to witness more. Office buildings, she was learning, were only vertical small towns with better shoes. The project intensified. Fairmont was acquiring a boutique chain, the systems were incompatible, and every department believed its emergency deserved top billing. Mara and Adrian stayed late 3 nights in a row. On Thursday, the cleaning crew arrived before they left. On Friday, Mara realized she knew his coffee order not because he had ever told her, but because she had watched him choose the same thing every morning without fail: black, no sugar, too hot to drink immediately. Near midnight, after an ugly call with a vendor, Mara leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. Adrian was at the far end of the conference table, sleeves rolled once, tie loosened 1/2 inch, staring at a risk matrix like he wanted it to confess. "Do you ever go home?" she asked. He did not look up. "Usually." That sounded legally crafted. He set the pen down. "I go home." That was somehow less convincing. This time he did look at her, and exhaustion had softened something in his face. "You should leave. Your section is done. So is yours." "I'm used to this." The answer should have ended the conversation. Instead Mara heard herself say, "That doesn't make it good." Silence settled between them, not awkward exactly, but careful. Then Adrian stood, crossed to the sideboard, and pushed a paper bag toward her. "You forgot to eat dinner." She blinked. "What?" "You were in back-to-back calls. Priya mentioned you skip meals when you're stressed." Inside the bag was a sandwich from the deli downstairs and a packet of sea salt chips. Mara stared at him. "You bought me food. You become less diplomatic when your blood sugar drops. That's your observation." It was observable. She laughed before she meant to, a startled warm sound that seemed to surprise both of them. Adrian's gaze shifted, briefly unguarded. The moment did not become anything dramatic. He returned to his chair. She opened the sandwich. The city hummed beyond the glass. But from then on, the edges between them altered. He started asking for her read on client personalities, not just data. She started recognizing the difference between his clipped voice in crowded meetings and the quieter one he used when they were alone. He never spoke more than necessary, but what he said mattered. If she mentioned a problem on Tuesday, he had already solved half of it by Wednesday. If she looked overwhelmed, a cleaned-up file appeared in her inbox without explanation. The fourth Monday brought yellow lisianthus and white stock. "Whoever this is," Priya declared, "he's not random. These bouquets are like mood boards." Mara touched the petals lightly. "Maybe she's a woman." Priya put a hand to her chest. "Finally. Mystery with nuance." That possibility should have widened the field. Instead Mara's mind betrayed her by narrowing to one impossible image: Adrian Vale in the pre-dawn quiet of a florist shop, selecting stems with the same attention he gave financial risk. She dismissed it instantly. Then, later that day, she passed his office and saw a small ceramic bowl on the credenza by the window. Inside it lay a sprig of dried lavender. It meant nothing. And still she noticed. The first crack in Adrian's reputation appeared on a rain-heavy Thursday when Mara saw him kneeling on the lobby floor in his immaculate suit, coaxing a frightened corgi out from beneath a leather bench. The dog belonged to a visiting client from Boston, a woman whose assistant had accidentally dropped the leash while juggling a phone, a laptop, and 3 forms of managerial distress. The corgi had bolted, then pancaked itself under the furniture with the stubborn despair unique to small dogs. Most people stood around offering bad ideas. Adrian crouched without ceremony, took off his watch, and spoke to the animal in a voice Mara had never heard before. Low. Patient. Ridiculously gentle. "There you are," he murmured. "I know. Too many strangers. Very bad architecture. Understandable." The corgi inched forward. Mara, halfway through the revolving doors with a wet umbrella and a coffee she no longer trusted not to spill, stopped dead. Theo from facilities materialized at her shoulder as if summoned by gossip itself. "I want you to know," he whispered, "I would not have believed this without witnesses." Adrian slid 2 fingers under the dog's chin, calm as stone, and the corgi climbed into his arms like it had known him its whole life. The client's assistant exhaled with the gratitude of someone who had briefly seen unemployment. Adrian handed the dog back, accepted a frantic thank you with a nod, and rose. When he turned, he found Mara watching him from across the lobby. Rain glittered on the windows behind her. Her umbrella dripped onto the marble. Adrian's expression shuddered too late. "You like dogs," she said. He glanced at the elevator bank, perhaps considering escape, then back at her. "Most of them." "Most? Some are unreasonable." Mara smiled despite herself. That sounded almost affectionate. "That was not my intention." "Of course not." He took 1 step closer, close enough that she noticed the rain darkening the shoulders of his coat. "You'll miss your train if you keep standing here interrogating me. Maybe I value answers more than punctuality." Something flickered in his face then, something warmer and more dangerous than amusement. "That," he said quietly, "has probably been true of you for a long time." She should have said something clever. Instead she walked into the elevator with a pulse that felt deeply unprofessional. The 5th Monday, there were dahlias in dark plum and ivory. Priya saw Mara's expression and narrowed her eyes. "You know something." "I know nothing." "You're glowing in a way I find administratively suspicious." Mara set her bag down. Can a woman not simply enjoy flowers and moderate emotional confusion? Not in this office, no. The suspect list had become a running joke across 2 departments. Someone in legal had started a betting pool, allegedly for charity. Nina from finance claimed operations was the obvious source because only operations understood consistency. Theo insisted the sender had to be older, repressed, and in possession of startlingly specific standards, which described half the executive floor and all of corporate accounting. Meanwhile Mara's actual life with Adrian kept accumulating details no one else saw. He knew which subway line she took because he once rerouted a team dinner reservation when signal problems delayed the trains in her direction. He noticed when she changed the format of a deck title because he said the revised version read more cleanly. He had a scar near his left wrist he hid beneath his watch band and a habit of looking at the skyline only after everyone else left a room, as though beauty were something he preferred in private. One evening, close to 10, the 2 of them were alone in his office reviewing final numbers before a client presentation. The city beyond the windows was all reflected light and black glass. Mara sat opposite him on the low sofa, laptop balanced on one knee. "You've been over that slide 6 times, Adrian said without looking up. "I know. You're still going to move the chart 2 millimeters to the left." She sighed. "Now you're profiling me. I'm observing patterns." "That sounds nicer when you do it." He lifted his gaze. "Does it?" "Yes. When I do it, it feels invasive. When you do it, it's accurate." The air shifted. Mara set the laptop aside. "Can I ask you something?" "You usually do." "Why does everyone think you hate them?" He went still. Truly still. That's an ambitious opening. "I'm serious." He leaned back slightly, as if physical distance could help him answer. "I don't hate anyone." "I know." "Do you?" She held his eyes. "Yes." For a moment she thought he might let the subject die there. Then he said, "People are comfortable with simple stories. Useful, difficult, cold. It saves time. And what story would be more accurate? He looked down at the pen in his hand, rolling it once between his fingers. That I don't have much patience for performance. That's not the same as cold. It often looks the same from a distance. The honesty of it landed between them with unexpected force. Mara wanted to ask what had taught him to distrust performance. She wanted to know what had built that controlled, careful man out of whatever he had been before. But his face had that faintly guarded look again, and she knew enough about fracture points to stop before she reached one. Instead she said, "For what it's worth, I think your problem is not that you're cold. No. I think your problem is that you're kind in a way that makes people nervous, because you clearly wish you were getting away with hiding it." The room fell quiet. Adrian's voice, when it came, was rougher than usual. "You should be careful with conclusions, Mara." "Why?" "Because once you decide you understand someone, you stop noticing what contradicts you." She stood, gathering the laptop mostly to steady herself. "That sounds less like advice and more like biography." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Go home. It's late." The next evening the company hosted a donor gala for a literacy nonprofit at a converted library downtown. Mara attended because attendance was strongly encouraged, which in corporate dialect meant mandatory if you enjoy career continuity. She wore a dark green dress Priya helped select, sleek enough to look effortless and uncomfortable enough to feel strategic. Adrian arrived later. He was in a black suit that should have been illegal in some states, talking to the CFO near the bar while half the room recalibrated. Mara hated herself a little for noticing. Worse, he noticed her noticing. When he crossed the room, people parted around him. He stopped beside her near a staircase lined with candles and old books. "You look," he began, then stopped. Mara raised a brow. "You've made it this far." "Finish the sentence." His gaze rested on her, steady and unreadable and very much not unreadable at all. "You look difficult to ignore." Her breath caught. Across the room, Priya actually turned away to give them privacy, which was the least subtle act of friendship Mara had ever witnessed. "Is that a compliment?" Mara asked softly. Adrian's mouth moved with the ghost of a smile. "An observation." Then the auction started, the room shifted, and the moment cracked open before either of them could decide what to do with it. If the gala had ended there, Mara might have gone home and let herself believe that whatever was happening between her and Adrian was slow, complicated, and headed somewhere she was not entirely afraid to follow. Instead the evening tipped. It happened in the archive room upstairs, where donors were being shown rare letters under soft museum lighting. Mara had stepped away from the main hall for a minute of quiet when she heard voices from the corridor beyond the half-open door. She would not have listened intentionally. She did not need to. One of the voices belonged to Vivian Holt, head of client relations and patron saint of polished interference. "I'm just saying," Vivian said lightly, "if you are trying to make her comfortable, flowers every Monday are not exactly subtle." Mara's spine locked. There was a pause. Then Adrian's voice, low and controlled. "You are making assumptions." "Oh, Adrian, please. Belle Thorne called me by mistake the first week because your account still had my number attached from the board fundraiser. I corrected them. I'm not judging. I'm fascinated." Mara felt the floor tilt. Adrian was silent for just long enough to confirm everything. Vivian continued, delighted by her own audacity. "So, are you pursuing her, or is this another one of your mysterious acts of civic restraint? This is none of your business." "Then it's personal." Mara stepped back before either of them could see her through the gap in the door. Her face felt hot. Not because she was angry. Not because she was embarrassed. Because the truth she had half imagined and half denied had become real in the strangest possible way. Adrian had been sending the flowers. Every Monday. No note. No demand. No flirtation attached. Just flowers appearing like a quiet insistence that she be noticed. She should have been pleased. Or flattered. Or at the very least less shaken. Instead she spent the next hour moving through the gala with the brittle concentration of someone carrying a glass object inside her chest. When Adrian found her near the coat check as the event ended, the city already silver with approaching rain, she had barely assembled her expression. "You left early from the auction," he said. "I got tired." His gaze lingered. "You're upset." Mara considered lying. She had become excellent at it in the last year. "Fine. Busy. Just thinking." But something about him made evasion feel thinner than usual. "I know about the flowers," she said. The words landed cleanly. Adrian went completely still. Around them, guests moved in softened currents, laughter echoing off marble, doors opening and closing against the wet night. Yet the space between them narrowed into something brutally private. "Vivian talks too much," he said at last. "That is not exactly a denial." "No." Mara held his gaze. "Why?" His expression changed almost imperceptibly, not toward panic, not toward apology, but toward a guardedness so old it seemed practiced into bone. "This is not the place." That answer, more than the admission, stung. She crossed her arms. "You have been leaving flowers on my desk for 5 weeks and your explanation is a scheduling conflict?" His jaw tightened. "I'm trying not to do this badly." "And how is that going for you?" A beat passed. "Not well," he said. The honesty of it should have softened her. Instead it made her feel suddenly exposed, like she had been part of a conversation she had not agreed to join. "You could have said something." "I know. But you didn't." "No." "Why?" He looked past her shoulder toward the rain-slicked street beyond the glass doors. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into that quieter register he used only when stripped of performance. "Because I wasn't sure what the flowers meant at first." "That made no sense." "You sent them." "Yes." "Then how could you not know what they meant?" His eyes came back to hers, and there was something in them she could not read, something heavier than attraction and more dangerous than simple longing. "That is exactly the problem." The answer was infuriating. Also frightening. Not because he seemed threatening, but because he seemed conflicted in a way she did not understand. Mara had lived through one relationship where important truths arrived only after the damage. She had no appetite for another. "I don't do well with half of a story," she said. Something flickered in his face. "I know." She let out a breath that felt sharp on the way out. "Then maybe don't give me one." She walked out before he could stop her. The next Monday, there were no flowers. Priya noticed before Mara sat down. "That's ominous." Mara opened her laptop. "Maybe the sender died. Too dark, even for me." Work continued because work always did. Fairmont entered final negotiation stages, and the entire floor ran on caffeine, spreadsheets, and undiscussed emotional disruption. Adrian remained precise, professional, and impossibly unreadable. He spoke to Mara exactly as much as the project required and not a syllable more. No one else would have noticed the difference. Mara noticed every missing inch. She told herself it was for the best. Then Thursday night brought the storm and the power flicker. Half the building lost one bank of lights around 9:30. Emergency systems kicked in, painting the executive corridor in low amber. Most teams had gone home. Mara was in the copy room wrestling with printouts when the lights trembled again and a folder slipped from her arms, sending annotated pages across the floor. Before she could crouch, someone else did. Adrian gathered the nearest stack, straightening the pages automatically. In the half-light his face looked less armored, the hard lines of him softened by fatigue. "You should have left an hour ago," he said. "So should you." He handed her the papers. Their fingers brushed. "Ridiculous, that something so small could feel like a confession. Mara swallowed. Are you going to explain? He looked at her for a long second. Not here. She laughed once, quietly, without humor. You really do hate hallways. His expression shifted, unexpectedly pained. Mara. It was the first time he had said her first name when it was not necessary for work. She froze. But before anything more could happen, Theo's voice rang from the corridor announcing that facilities had found the breaker issue, and the moment disappeared under fluorescent light as if it had never existed. For 3 more days Mara tried to live inside the safety of incomplete information. It was not a good place to live. She worked. She revised decks. She ignored Priya's increasingly surgical observations. She answered Adrian in calm professional sentences and avoided being alone with him longer than required. The problem was not that he had sent the flowers. The problem was that he had sent them with history attached, with hesitation attached, with some hidden reason that seemed to matter more than the gesture itself. Mara knew enough about complicated men to understand the danger of becoming the visible part of an invisible grief. The answer arrived by accident. On Sunday she went into the office to finish a report before Monday's client steering meeting. The building was nearly empty, the elevators too quiet, the city outside washed in pale spring rain. Her floor was dark except for the strategy pod and, unexpectedly, Adrian's office. The door stood partially open. Mara had no intention of entering. Then a draft stirred a loose page from the credenza near the window, sending it skidding across the floor. She stepped inside to catch it before it disappeared under a cabinet. It was not a work document. It was a florist receipt. Belle Thorne. Weekly standing order, Monday delivery. Below that, handwritten in blue ink, were the words, "Keep lilies out." Elena hated funerals. Mara stared at the note until the room sharpened around it. Elena. Not a client code. Not a project label. A person. She set the page down exactly where she had found it and backed away as if the office itself had become intimate. She should have left immediately. Instead her gaze snagged on a framed photograph half hidden behind a stack of binders. Adrian, younger by several years, standing beside a woman with his eyes and an easier smile. She held a bouquet high enough to partly cover his tie. Both of them were laughing at something outside the frame. Before Mara could look away, a voice behind her said, very quietly, "You shouldn't be in here." She turned so fast her shoulder hit the shelf. Adrian stood in the doorway, expression unreadable but not empty. Tired. Braced. As if this scene had lived in his imagination long enough to become inevitable. "I came in for the report," Mara said, hating how thin it sounded. That page blew off the credenza. He glanced at the receipt, then at the photograph. Something in him closed. "I see. Elena was your sister." It was not a question. He set his keys on the desk with too much care. Yes. Mara's heartbeat turned strangely slow. The flowers were for her. They used to be. The room seemed to contract around the answer. She looked at the photograph again, then back at him. And now? Adrian did not respond immediately. Rain tapped at the windows. Somewhere far below, a horn sounded on the avenue, absurdly ordinary. When Elena started treatment, he said at last, she was 26 and furious that the world expected bravery from her as if it were a dress code. Monday was chemo day. She said if she had to spend every Monday being poisoned on purpose, she was going to require beauty as compensation. His voice stayed controlled, but only just. So I brought her flowers every Monday. Different ones. Never lilies. She hated lilies. Mara said nothing. There are moments when sympathy becomes a kind of intrusion if spoken too soon. He continued, eyes on the window, not on her. After she died, I kept ordering them for a while. Then I stopped. Last winter Belle Thorne asked if I wanted to restart the account for the office fundraiser. I said yes. It was easier than saying no. And then you sent them to me, Mara said. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Why? This time the question did not come out angry. Only afraid. Adrian finally looked at her. The restraint in his face was more intimate than a confession would have been. Because on your first Monday here, you sat at your desk after everyone else had gone to lunch and pretended to be reading a deck while very carefully not crying. Mara forgot to breathe. I wasn't spying, he said. I was coming back from a client call. You looked, he stopped, recalibrated. You looked like someone trying to survive a public place with private damage. Elena used to do that. Smile until people left. Break quietly. I saw it and kept walking. Then I kept thinking about it. Monday came. The florist account was still open. Mara's eyes stung before she could stop them. So the flowers were pity, she said softly. No, the word came instantly, rougher than anything she had heard from him. That would have been easier. He took one step forward, then seemed to think better of another. The first bouquet was instinct. The second was because I realized you took the first one home instead of leaving it to wilt in the office. The third was because you smiled at a spreadsheet when you solved a problem, and I had never seen anyone look proud and surprised at the same time. By the fourth, it had stopped being about what I remembered and started being about what I noticed. Mara looked down at the receipt on the desk. Keep lilies out. Elena hated funerals. The grief in the room was not abstract anymore. It had shape. A sister. Mondays. A ritual borrowed from love and then redirected toward her before he fully understood why. No wonder he had seemed unsettled by his own gesture. No wonder his explanation had come in fragments. He was not just pursuing her. He was crossing the fault line between memory and desire and hating himself for the confusion. I didn't know, she whispered. I know. She swallowed against the ache in her throat. But you should have told me. Yes. Why didn't you? His answer came without defense. Because I was afraid you would think I was trying to make you carry a ghost. The brutal accuracy of it took the room's air with it. Mara looked at him for a long time. And were you? He held her gaze, and for the first time since she had known him, Adrian Vale looked like a man with nothing between his hands and the truth. At first, I was trying to do one small kind thing for someone who looked lonelier than they wanted anyone to know. After that, no. After that, I was in trouble. Mara should have left after that. It would have been the sensible choice. She had the truth now, or at least enough of it to understand why the flowers had felt so precise, so careful, so unlike a flirtation from a stranger. She understood Elena's place in the story. She understood the ritual. She understood why Adrian, a man who controlled everything he could touch, had looked almost angry at the vulnerability of his own actions. What she did not understand was what to do with the tenderness that remained after the explanation. Instead of leaving, she sat down in the guest chair across from his desk. Adrian looked startled, which on him was visible only in the faint change around his eyes. Tell me about her, Mara said. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might refuse. Then he sat too, elbows on his knees, hands linked loosely. Elena was younger than me by 3 years, he said. Which she considered an administrative error. She believed I existed primarily to open jars, edit emails, and scare off men with weak conversation. Mara smiled despite everything. She laughed loudly in restaurants. Adopted elderly dogs. Once got banned from a wedding venue for trying to rescue centerpiece candles because she said the flowers deserved better lighting. The corner of his mouth moved faintly. She could talk to anyone. She thought most rules were suggestions written by insecure people. That sounds exhausting. It was catastrophic. And you adored her. He glanced down, then back up. Yes. The single syllable carried years inside it. Mara let him speak at his own pace. He told her about hospital waiting rooms and Elena insisting on lipstick for infusion days because she refused to look like an apology. He told her about the florist on Bleecker who learned her favorite stems, about the dark humor she used like a shield, about how Monday flowers became less about illness and more about refusing to surrender the shape of beauty to fear. He did not dramatize. He did not perform grief. He simply offered facts with enough care that the emotion beneath them became impossible to ignore. By the time he finished, the rain had thinned outside. The city looked rinsed. Mara folded her hands in her lap. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "So am I." Silence settled again, but it had changed. It no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge being built carefully from opposite sides. Then Adrian said, "I also owe you an apology that has nothing to do with my sister." Mara looked up. "I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you with the whole story before it became something you had to overhear or discover." His gaze did not leave hers. "And I should not have let my uncertainty become your burden." That, more than anything else, undid her. Because it was so precise. So accountable. So unlike the vague regret she had once received from a man who wanted absolution without consequence. "You did make it my burden," she said quietly. "I know. I thought maybe I was part of a story you hadn't finished with someone else." His expression tightened with unmistakable pain. "You were never that." Mara rose and crossed to the window because staying seated felt too vulnerable. 20 floors below, headlights moved through wet streets in broken threads of gold. "My ex used to say things only when there was no way to answer them honestly without making him uncomfortable. Then he'd call me closed off because I didn't perform the right feeling on cue." She looked down at the avenue, not at Adrian. "I am not afraid of complicated. I am afraid of being misread until it becomes permanent." Behind her, she heard him stand. When he spoke, his voice was near enough to alter the air around her. "Then let me be accurate." Mara turned. He had stopped a few feet away, giving her space even now. His tie was gone, his sleeves still rolled, the severe lines of him softened by fatigue and honesty and something unmistakably personal. "I noticed you before I wanted to," he said. "I noticed that you make lists when you're anxious and then hide them beneath cleaner drafts. I noticed you pretend to dislike attention but soften every time someone remembers a detail about you. I noticed you stand up for people in meetings without making them feel rescued. I noticed that when you laugh for real, you look surprised by it, as if joy arrived at the wrong address and you're deciding whether to sign for it." Mara's throat tightened. "I sent the flowers because I wanted Monday to be kinder to you," he said. "Then I kept sending them because I wanted to be someone who could do that honestly. I failed at the honesty part. Not the feeling." The room held still. He did not touch her. Did not crowd her. Adrian Vale, who could command a boardroom with 3 sentences, waited as if waiting were the only respectful language left. "You make this very difficult," Mara whispered. "Yes," he said, and the ghost of humor there nearly broke her. "That has been your review of me from the start." She laughed, which turned unexpectedly into something closer to a shaky exhale. "You are impossible. I'm aware. And yet somehow better than I thought." His eyes changed. "That may be the nicest thing anyone has said to me this quarter." The fragile strangeness of the moment tipped toward warmth. Mara looked at him, really looked. At the control he wore like armor. At the exhaustion. At the care threaded through everything he did, even the distance. He had hurt her, yes. But not by withholding feeling. By fumbling it. By trying to protect both of them with secrecy and only managing to wound them unevenly. She stepped closer. Not into his arms. Not yet. Just closer. "What happens now?" she asked. Adrian's answer came without hesitation. "I stop hiding behind flowers." That would have been enough. Then his phone rang. He closed his eyes briefly, glanced at the screen, and muttered, "Fairmont." Mara laughed outright this time, because of course the universe would interrupt the first honest moment they had ever managed with a client escalation. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time she saw full amusement, unguarded and startlingly young. "I have to take this," he said. "I know." He accepted the call, already shifting gears, but before he turned away he said quietly, "Don't disappear." Mara held his gaze. "Not tonight." They did not become a couple in one miraculous leap after that Sunday. Real life was more stubborn. Monday's steering meeting ran long. Tuesday brought a vendor outage. Wednesday, Fairmont's board requested a revised integration timeline that effectively turned the entire office into a controlled emergency. Whatever existed between Mara and Adrian had to live in glances, unfinished conversations, late-night coffees left wordlessly beside each other's laptops, and an entirely new form of awareness that made every shared silence feel charged. Priya noticed by Thursday. She cornered Mara in the kitchenette while the espresso machine hissed like an informant. "You either kissed someone or solved childhood trauma. Which is it?" Mara nearly dropped a mug. "Why are those the only options?" "Because your face says emotional plot development." Mara stirred sugar into coffee she did not want. Nothing happened. Priya folded her arms. "That statement is fiction." Something in Mara's expression must have softened, because Priya's own did too. "Is it good fiction or dangerous fiction?" Mara looked down at the coffee. "Possibly both." Priya, to her rare credit, did not pry further. "Well," she said lightly, "if you need me, I'm available for logistical support, witness intimidation, and outfit consultation. Thank you for listing those in escalating order. I know my strengths." Meanwhile Adrian remained careful. Not distant. Not again. Just deliberate. He did not send flowers the next Monday. Instead, just after 8, he paused by Mara's desk while no one else was paying attention and set down a single folded card. Inside, in precise dark handwriting, were 7 words. "No more half-stories. Dinner tonight, if you want." Mara read it twice, then once more for structural integrity. Priya materialized from nowhere. "What is that?" "Nothing." "Mara. It is a paper-based threat." Priya snatched the card, read it, inhaled so sharply she nearly achieved orbit, then handed it back with reverence. "I take back every bad thing I have ever said about corporate life." Dinner happened at a small restaurant in the West Village that managed to be candlelit without becoming self-important. Adrian had chosen it because, he admitted after they were seated, Elena used to approve of the bread and distrust the music, which sounded like the kind of detail he would only offer if trying very hard to stay honest. So they were honest. Mara told him about Chicago. About the fiancé who wanted access to her softness without learning the cost of earning it. About how humiliation lingered longer than heartbreak because humiliation re-edit memory, coloring even the good parts with shame. Adrian listened the way he did everything important, completely. He told her about becoming the practical sibling by default. About the year after Elena died, when every room seemed arranged around the shape of her absence. About work becoming easier than grief because work rewarded control. About earning his reputation for coldness partly because it was useful and partly because once people believed in it, they stopped asking for the kind of emotional participation he no longer knew how to offer. "And now?" Mara asked. Adrian looked at the water glass in his hand. "Now I am sitting in a restaurant explaining my defects in itemized form to a woman I would very much like to see again." Mara smiled. "That was almost charming. I've been practicing." What a horrifying thought. But when he walked her to the subway, he did not kiss her. He looked like he wanted to. Mara knew she wanted him to. Yet the restraint between them had become its own language, and for once it did not feel like fear. It felt like respect. The first kiss arrived a week later in the office, which was exactly the sort of terrible idea both of them would have advised against professionally. It was after Fairmont signed. The entire floor exhaled at once. Theo claimed he heard 3 directors laugh in public, which he considered evidence of economic recovery. Someone ordered champagne. Someone else set out supermarket cake. People drifted from cubicle to conference room with the relieved days of disaster survivors. Mara escaped to the records alcove near the back stairwell for 2 minutes of silence and found Adrian already there, jacket off, tie loosened, staring at nothing with the expression of a man whose body had not yet received notice that the emergency was over. "You're hiding," she said. He turned. "So are you. Mine is celebratory hiding. Mine is decompression." She smiled and leaned against the shelf opposite him. "You know people are calling you human today. That seems premature. Jordan from IT said you smiled during contract review." Adrian looked genuinely alarmed. "That is damaging." Mara laughed. He watched her for a second, then said softly, "I like that sound." Everything in her went still. No flowers. No mystery. No intermediaries. Just that. She stepped toward him. He met her halfway, like a man approaching something precious and not entirely trusted to remain. When he kissed her, it was careful for all of 1 second. Then it was not. Adrian kissed the way he lived, controlled until the exact moment control ceased being honest. One hand at her waist, the other braced against the shelf behind her, as if he were holding back from far more than he intended to show. Mara's fingers caught at the open collar of his shirt. The records alcove, the stairwell, the entire fluorescent universe outside them vanished. When they broke apart, both breathing harder than the situation strictly justified, Adrian rested his forehead briefly against hers. "This is profoundly bad office policy," he murmured. Mara's laugh was unsteady. "And yet your compliance language needs work." His eyes opened, dark and intent and warmed by something that looked astonishingly like happiness. "Then perhaps you should revise it." They might have kissed again if Theo had not opened the stairwell door at that exact second, seen enough to ruin everyone's blood pressure, and backed out whispering, "I saw absolutely nothing and therefore know everything." Once a secret becomes visible in an office, it stops belonging entirely to the people living it. By Monday the building had transformed into a polite conspiracy. Priya brought Mara coffee without comment but with a face so smug it deserved regulation. Theo whistled love songs in the hallway whenever Adrian passed. Nina from finance claimed her bet in legal had matured into a charitable windfall. No one said anything explicit. Everyone said everything else. Adrian handled the gossip with startling calm. Perhaps because he had spent so long being misunderstood that being understood, however noisily, no longer seemed like the worst outcome. The problem came from somewhere else. Vivian Holt. She requested a private word with Mara after a leadership sync and chose a seating area near the window specifically designed for uncomfortable conversations disguised as mentorship. "I hope," Vivian said, arranging her silk sleeve with surgical care, "that you're being thoughtful." "About?" "Optics. Timing. Power dynamics." She smiled as though generosity required lighting. "Adrian is excellent, but he can be consuming. Men who live almost entirely in control don't always notice what they ask people to adapt around." Mara looked at her for a long moment. "Is there a reason you're saying this to me and not to him?" Vivian's smile thinned. "Because women usually pay the cost." It was not entirely wrong, which made it more irritating. Mara thanked her, because manners were cheaper than war, then spent the rest of the afternoon angry at the conversation and angrier that part of it had lodged beneath her skin. Not because she doubted Adrian's intentions. Because she understood how easily a relationship could become an ecosystem where one person's restraint dictated everyone else's breathing. That evening, she told him. They were on his apartment balcony, dinner half finished, the city spread around them in blue glass and sodium light. Adrian's apartment was exactly what she had expected and not what she had expected at all, clean lines, dark wood, too few decorative objects, and one overflowing bookshelf that gave away the existence of a hidden life. There were novels with cracked spines, cookbooks marked with notes, and a framed photo of Elena on the bottom shelf beside a terracotta pot containing a rosemary plant that had seen better days. Mara repeated Vivian's warning as accurately as she could. Adrian listened without interruption, hands resting on the balcony rail. When she finished, he said, "Is that what you think?" The quiet directness of the question forced equal honesty. "I think you are used to deciding alone for very good reasons. I think sometimes you forget that inviting someone into your life means the decision-making structure has to change." He absorbed that without flinching. Mara continued, softer now. "I also think I do not want to become grateful for scraps just because the person offering them is better than the last man who disappointed me." The city hummed below them. Then Adrian turned to face her fully. "You will never have to earn clarity from me by asking 6 times, he said. "If I fail at that, you should walk." Mara searched his face. That sounded rehearsed. "It has been under development." Against her will, she smiled. "You are impossible. I have received that feedback." He reached for her then, not to end the conversation, but to continue it more gently, fingers threading through hers with a care that still surprised her every time. "Stay difficult," he said quietly. "I don't want your compliance. I want your accuracy." There it was again, that language of being seen correctly. It undid her as reliably as any grand declaration could have. 2 weeks later Calder Ridge held its annual spring benefit on the rooftop terrace, all string lights and city wind and executives pretending they did not care who saw them with champagne. Mara nearly skipped it. Priya forbade that with the authority of a woman who had chosen both shoes and battle strategy. "You are attending," Priya said. "You are wearing the blue dress. If anything emotionally cinematic happens, I want front row spiritual seating." Nothing cinematic happened at first. There were speeches. Donor plaques. Theo in a borrowed blazer flirting shamelessly with a woman from legal. Adrian in charcoal, moving through conversations with that contained grace he wore like another tailored layer. He found Mara twice across the terrace, each glance brief and private and somehow more intimate than touch. Then the wind shifted. A staff member from events, struggling with a display of table arrangements near the terrace edge, lost grip on a crate. Small glass bud vases tipped, wobbled, and shattered in a soft bright chain. People startled. Someone cursed. The event coordinator went pale. Before anyone else moved, Adrian did. So did Mara. They reached the spill together. He guided 2 guests away from broken glass while she steadied the remaining arrangements. Theo appeared with towels. Priya commandeered a tray. For 3 minutes the elegant benefit turned into collective chaos. And then Mara saw what had survived. 1 bouquet. Not part of the official display. Set apart near the center table in a low ceramic bowl. White tulips. Navy ribbon. Her breath caught. She turned slowly. Adrian stood a few feet away, city lights behind him, one hand still holding the neck of an empty champagne bottle he had been about to set down before the accident. His gaze held hers, unguarded. He had done this on purpose. Not hidden at her desk. Not slipped into Monday anonymity. Here. In public. After everything. The terrace noise dimmed around the edges. Mara walked toward him. "What is this?" she asked, though she knew. "A correction," he said. The simplicity of it nearly broke her. He set the bottle aside and came the rest of the way to her, the rooftop lights catching in the wind-tossed dark of his hair. Around them, conversations continued in softened fragments, but a perimeter of attention had already formed the way it always does when people sense something important is about to happen and have the decency to pretend they are not witnessing it. Adrian glanced once at the bouquet, then back at Mara. "The first flowers I sent you were hidden because I didn't understand myself well enough to attach my name to them. The next one stayed hidden because by then I understood too much and handled it badly. His voice was low, even, carrying only as far as it needed to. You asked for the whole story. You were right to ask. I don't want to build anything with you using omissions as architecture. Mara did not trust herself to interrupt. He continued, eyes steady on hers. I loved my sister. I still do. I will miss her on Mondays and every other day for the rest of my life. That grief belongs to me. It is not a room I expect you to furnish. What changed with you was not memory disguising itself as desire. It was desire arriving through a ritual I already understood and then asking me, very inconveniently, to tell the truth. The wind pressed cool against Mara's bare arms. She barely felt it. I am telling it now, Adrian said. I love the way you question polished answers until something honest appears underneath. I love that you notice people in meetings before they disappear. I love that you make jokes when you're frightened because courage, for you, has always looked more